All right, so I picked up Eye of the World, I believe it was fall of 1990. I had become a reader the year before, the school year before. So probably I was 14 when I discovered fantasy novels. I started reading them over the summer. That would have been 90 or 89. And I became a pretty big reader in that year. And the thing I always say is, in hindsight, I had started to look for series that I could discover on my own, because before then, everything that I found had been handed to me. I'd read Dragonsbane. I'd found some books in the library with the help of a librarian. I'd been handed Sword of Shannara that summer by a church leader, a young men's church leader, and I had read through all of those. I'd had David Eddings handed to me by another friend who's like, "Oh, you should read this." And so I'd gotten through all the books that all my friends and family and librarians had handed to me, and I'd started going to bookstores. And the bookstore that I went to was Cosmic Comics in Lincoln, Nebraska. You say Cosmic Comics. Well, Cosmic Comics had its own section for books in it, and it only sold paperbacks, no hardcovers. And why I went there is they had a punch card. If you bought 10, you got one for free. That's pretty cool, huh? I carried that punch card in my wallet. I was so happy every time I got to turn one in and get a book. And I've been buying the books that people had recommended. That's where I gotten, my David Eddings books and the Anne McCaffrey books that the library didn't have and things like that. I can still remember the first book that I went into a bookstore and bought was an Anne McCaffrey book, because my school library didn't have them all. And so I went and bought one, and I kept that book for very many years. So I started going to Cosmic Comics, and I started buying books. This is where I bought my first pack of Magic cards. Legends, when it came out. Bought a pack of Legends at Cosmic Comics. And I would always go in, and they'd have the new releases shelf right in the door. You'd walk right in the door, and just to the right is all the new books that have come out. And on that shelf, it was actually on the bottom for some reason. I don't know why it was on the bottom shelf. His name is Jay. It should have been in the middle, but it was on the bottom. The very, very bottom shelf was this big, thick book, The Eye of the World. And I'm like, oh, that's a big book. And I had learned by then that you like the big books because they only cost like $1 more than the small books, but they were like twice as long. Right? And so I was always on the lookout, because I didn't have a ton of money back then for books, and I was always on the lookout for what are those paperbacks that are big. And I remember picking up The Wheel of Time and that gorgeous Daryl Sweet cover on the cover, the painting on the cover. Still, to this day, I think Daryl Sweet's best piece is the Eye of the World cover. And then it had interior art. There was another painting of the same piece. I now know what almost certainly happened is that Daryl Sweet turned in two versions, and Harriet and Jim liked them both. And they're like, we like these both for the cover. And so they went ahead and did both and stuck one in his end pages. But there are two interpretations of the team leaving the two rivers. And fun fact on that artwork, it has an extra person in the artwork. I can't remember what his name was. Harriet told me. It was one of the other guys that's in Emmons Field. Yeah, it's Daryl. You're right. And she talked about why they cut him and things like that. It's very fun to hear her chat about that. But they got the cover before they'd finished the revisions before he got cut. And so there's an extra character on the cover. But anyway, I took that book home and I loved it. And I felt a certain possessiveness over it, because I'm like, oh, this little book that I discovered. Little did I know that everyone was discovering it at the same time. But when the second book came out, I was really excited, and I got that. And the third book is when I knew something was happening, because even Cosmic Comics got in the hardcover, which they never did, right? They didn't get hardcovers of Jurassic Park. They only had paperbacks of Jurassic Park, right? But they got hardcovers of The Dragon Reborn, and I bought one of those hardcovers. The first hardcover I can remember buying with my own money. The others I got for Christmas presents. I bought that, and I'm like, It's because of my patronage that this book series has taken off. Now everybody knows. And then at college, I went online and I found out that everyone loved The Wheel of Time. They were all talking about it. And it wasn't this little series that could. It was the dominant force in fantasy by that point. But I'd always kind of imagined that it was this little indie series that I loved that no one else had ever heard of because I didn't have a lot of fantasy reader friends. So what did The Wheel of Time do? Part of it is me. It's the magic system, right? I'd been reading a lot of fantasy at that point, and I do love a lot of these fantasies. But the ones I mention frequently, like a lot of the Anne McCaffrey, those are, she would call them science fiction, but there's a very loose magic system to that. Obviously, Tolkien, it's a little bit vague what Gandalf can do and what he can't do. Sort of Shannara is kind of the same way. Wheel of Time had, the Aes Sedai and the One Power, and the way it worked was a step more toward a really rule-based, intricate magic system that felt, in a lot of ways, more real for that reason. I think that people, if magic were real, would approach it and figure it out the way that they were figuring out. You would have weaves. You would have things that you can do, even if there's a lot of questions to the magic. I really liked that. I really liked that it was an ensemble cast, that I liked the whole cast. And that was a distinctive thing from a lot of what I've been reading, where it was just one hero on an adventure. I really bonded with Perrin a lot in that first book, but I also felt like Moiraine was more interesting than a lot of the mentor figures that were in others. As much as I'm Moiraine, but that was good, right? Because she felt more like a real person than perhaps, no shade at Al-Anon and people like this, but she did feel like she was flawed in an interesting way. And as the books progressed, they became more and more about the setting and the political intrigue and things like this, and a little less quest fantasy. And as a reader, we often talk about how Harry Potter readers would grow up with Harry Potter becoming more dark and more intricate. Well, in some ways that happened with Eye of the World in a different way in The Wheel of Time, in that as I was growing up, the books were becoming less about, we're on a cool adventure with Matt, and more on the fate of the world is at stake, and in order to deal with the fate of the world, you actually have to work with the politics of all these kingdoms. As fantasy was growing up, in a lot of ways, I was growing up. And it's no surprise that Game of Thrones came along, where political intrigue became the forefront rather than the adventure, at about the same time that Wheel of Time did the same thing. But Wheel of Time had all that fantastic world building, all of that lore, all of that, epic fantasy feel. And so it's really when 4, 5, and 6 happened that The Wheel of Time became my favorite series. If you would have asked me during Eye of the World, Great Hunt era, I probably still would have said Anne McCaffrey or David Eddings or one of these other. And it was book 4 where I'm like, no, this is doing something that I like. I don't necessarily think it's not qualitatively oh, this is better than Anne McCaffrey. I don't think it is. I think they're both fantastic masterworks in the top tier. But what I love the most, Wheel of Time became as it progressed. And those books, 4, 5, and 6, is this is what I want to do. This is what I'm absolutely in love with. This is where I am. And I think that's where I first recognized what I wanted to be as a writer in those books. Okay, so the first, this, it depends. The first kind of real collector's item that I bought was The Art of Michael Whelan. I asked for it for Christmas. It was a specialty book. You had to order. The bookstores didn't carry them. And it was $60. This is in the early 90s. $60 for a book was a huge amount. And I'd never bought a book on that level or anything, but that's what I wanted. I wanted this really nice thing. And I still have it. It's on my shelf in my office back home. The Art of Michael Whelan, fantastic book. All of his book covers and then a lot of his fine art pieces. And I've said many times before that that's where the first inspiration for Elantris came from, was looking through some of his fine art pieces and imagining the stories that would go along with the books. The books that hadn't been written yet, about things that he just come up with in his imagination. That's the first collector's item I can remember getting. Leatherbounds were not really a thing that you could get a hold of very easily, particularly in Lincoln, Nebraska, back in the 90s, right? I heard about Wheel of Time leatherbounds, but the first one I actually managed to get was when they sent me one because I wrote them. And I think that's the actual first leatherbound book that I ever owned, because deluxe editions, special editions, they just weren't a thing back then. In fact, the reason my company kind of exists as it does right now is because I got that leatherbound, and I'm like, this was ridiculous that I couldn't get a hold of the earlier ones. And no shade at Tor, but the edition is really boring, right? To make a leatherbound, they just took the regular book. They then rebound it with leather, but there's not even a symbol on it, I don't think. I think it's just like, here's this leatherbound book. Do we have it? Oh, yeah, we have it. So we have it. So you can look at it right here. You can see there's no symbol on it anywhere. It just has this. It looks like a textbook, all right? Yes, it's bound in leather, and I was super excited to get it, and it's still a precious possession. But if you open it up, it has the same end pages as the commercial edition, and it has the exact same contents. There's not even new drop caps or new maps or anything. This is just how they did it, and this was $250. This is $250, and that's in 2010 money. $250. These were selling for $250. I think as each. Each was $250. And this is not the publisher trying to rip you off. There just was not an industry for these. These were super expensive for them to make. I think Tom told me that these they did for fans, they actually cost $125 to print each one, and then they sold them for $250 with the bookstore taking a 45% cut. And so Tom's like, we make like $5. This is why he gave me my rights back for free. He's like, we make less on a leatherbound than we do on a hardcover, or maybe like $1 more. It's just it's infrastructure. It's people. People wanted these, but there's this problem where people want them, but not enough people want them for the bookstores to be willing to risk having a $250 product on the bookshelf that could just sit there and take space and take inventory. If you think about Barnes & Noble, like if we order 10,000 of these, that's $250,000, right? Am I right? No, it's like $2.5 million. Yeah, $2.5 million in money that's just sitting on the shelves that we may not sell. We just can't do that. So the demand was there, but they weren't really willing to pull the trigger yet because they hadn't figured out how to get these. Like I would go into bookstores and be like, do you have the leatherbound? They're like, we've never even heard of a Wheel of Time leatherbound. Who buys Wheel of Time leatherbounds? This is why when we did ours, I'm like, all right, we're going to change this. So you can see I said, all right, let's make the book that I thought I was buying. They gave me this for free because I wrote the book. But I did get one for free. But let's give people what they want. Let's give actual artwork on the cover, right? Let's make the spine not just look like a textbook, look like something really cool. And then when you open this thing up, let's make sure that you see immediately that there's going to be new artwork in this. It's not just the edition that you're used to. Let's, luxuryify everything about this book. Gold on the outside rather than the standard white, and full art, paintings in it, and things like that. Just like let's really do the book that I thought I was getting. Man, that's a hefty book. That feels so cool. Because Eye of the World is not the longest Wheel of Time book. It's a decent, but it's like 200,000 words, isn't it? So it's like Mistborn length. Not Stormlight length. So what was my first leatherbound? It was this. It was actually the Gathering Storm. We have the Towers of Midnight one here, but it was the Gathering Storm leatherbound. And I feel like and I feel very proud of this. I feel like I helped change this market. Now, there were other people around that were starting to make Leatherbounds and had been for a little while. If you knew what you were doing, you could get them on the internet by then. Really nice editions done by several really cool presses. But the mass, ability to know where to get these was not there. I feel very proud of the way that deluxe editions and luxury editions are now like a major part of the market. And it's how a lot of authors are making their income off of these things. And so I feel very proud of my place in that. And I feel like I finally get to have the book that I wanted back in the late 90s when I went to the bookstore and said, "Do you have the Leatherbound?" And they're like, "We haven't even heard of this." Well, I have the Leatherbound. You have to come to me. Won't be in the bookstores. But there it is. Oh. Why should you read The Wheel of Time? Well, The Wheel of Time is excellently written, right? Robert Jordan's mastery of prose is unparalleled in writing. I think he's one of the best with viewpoint and with just descriptions that we have. The Wheel of Time feels kind of luxurious in its writing compared to a lot of contemporary sci-fi fantasy. And, those of us who write like that, we do it on purpose. But these 90s throwbacks like this and Guy Gavriel Kay, there's just a feel to them that I really like that you might enjoy as well. They're more in the Tolkien tradition. The other reason is The Wheel of Time is a finished, fantastic fantasy epic. And there aren't actually very many of those out there that you can read. Like if you love Lord of the Rings and you want to read a fantasy epic that is done, your options are like Wheel of Time and Malazan is kind of it, right? These are huge endeavors, and I can tell you it ends really well. It has an ending. It is a good ending, and I wrote it. But The Eye of the World is a great book, and the series gets stronger and stronger the further it goes. And you get to watch fantasy grow up in a lot of ways by reading this. Like Tolkien, it was already grown up, but the genre got to grow up through essentially The Wheel of Time. It's fantastic characters, it's fantastic world building, it's fantastic writing. I mean, what is there not to love? The first book's going to read a little Tolkien inspired. Right? It's a quest fantasy with a bunch of people running from a village chased by dark, shadowy figures and things like that. You're gonna feel the Tolkien influence in this one, and then the second book is gonna feel a step different. You're like, oh, something. The world building's different. This is different, and then by book 3, you're gonna be like, this. The main protagonist feels like he is so different from anything you'd see in a Tolkien-inspired thing. And then book 4 is like, now we're into like the deep world building. Like if you like Stormlight Archive style of world building, book 4 is your jam. You're going to get there and be like, oh, I get why Brandon loves this book. So, hey, this has been Brandon Talks About the Wheel of Time. They were planning for this just to be some quick answers. They should know better by now. And they're like, wow, you went on. And I'm like, yes, I really love this series. I will talk for hours about the Wheel of Time if you give me a chance. I didn't do that to you. But, Wheel of Time, The Eye of the World, we are in this for the long haul. This is going to consume a giant portion of the resources at Dragonsteel for the next 14 years. That is what we have signed on for. We are going to give you a fantastic collection of Wheel of Time Leatherbounds. And the best way to make sure that we can keep doing this is to go pre-order or pick up your copy, depending on when you're watching this, of Eye of the World. That'll tell us how much we can print of future ones. It can give us what we need to know in order to keep doing this for the next 14 years so that everybody can have their full leather-bound collection of the Wheel of Time on their shelf. It's going to look so cool in a decade and a half when we're done.